So this is video number 9 of the Market Structures series in the IB Economics High Level Only Microeconomics component, and in this video I will discuss price discrimination. So price discrimination is basically the practice of charging different consumers different prices for the same product, where the price difference is not justified by differences in costs. So it's when you charge different consumer groups a different price, but this price difference is not a reason or justified by a difference in costs. It exists when a producer sells the exact same product to different consumer groups at different prices. Now, for producers to practice price discrimination, there have to be necessary conditions. So what are those necessary conditions for the practice of price discrimination? The first one is the firm must have some degree of market power. If the firm doesn't have market power, it doesn't really have the ability to discriminate according to price. Second condition, there must be groups of consumers and each group has a different price elasticity of demand. So groups of consumers with differing price elasticities of demand for the product. The last condition, the firm must actually be able to separate groups to ensure that no resale of the product occurs. So that if one group is charged a lower price, they don't buy it and then go and resell it at a higher price. So you have to be able to separate the groups to ensure that no resale occurs. These are the necessary conditions to allow a firm to practice price discrimination. Now, there are 3 different levels of price discrimination. There's first degree price discrimination, second degree price discrimination, and third degree price discrimination. Let's clarify or explain the difference between each of these 3 levels. First degree price discrimination. This happens when each consumer pays exactly the price that he or she is willing to pay. So say, for example, you're a tourist and you're visiting a bazaar in Turkey or a bazaar in some country where you negotiate with the trader. So traders in a bazaar, they practice first degree price discrimination. Each tourist will pay a different price based on how well their bargaining or negotiating power is. This is first degree price discrimination. Second degree price discrimination happens when a firm charges different prices to consumers depending on how much they purchase. So a lot of electricity companies, for example, they charge a high price for the first number of units of electricity consumed, and then a lower price for any extra units consumed. A lot of telephone companies will charge you a high price for the first, 30 text messages during a month, and then a lower price for any text messages after that. This is second degree price discrimination. Third degree price discrimination is the most common form of price discrimination. This happens when consumers are identified in different market segments, and a separate price is charged in each market segment depending on the price elasticity of demand of the consumers in that market segment. For example, a cinema charges a lower price for students because they are on a budget, they have less money, therefore their demand is much more sensitive to price, so they have more elastic demand, and a higher price for adults who are assumed to have more income and therefore their demand is less elastic or more inelastic. This is the most common form of price discrimination called third degree price discrimination. Now, there are many ways by which a firm can separate its total market into market segments. One of the ways is time. So, for example, commuters commuting in the morning will have more inelastic demand than people who are free all day and want to go shopping. So maybe charge a higher price for the train ticket or the public transport ticket in the morning. This is one way. A second way is by age. For example, children versus adults at a cinema. Children have much more elastic demand, therefore charge them a lower price. Adults have much more inelastic or less responsive demand. A third way is gender. So charge a different price for men versus women. I can't really think of an example off the top of my head, but it does exist. Income. Charge a different price for high-income consumers compared to low-income consumers. A lot of lawyers and doctors practice this way of separating their markets into market segments. So the wealthy clients pay a sort of a higher fee, and then they do a lot of free or pro bono work for the lower income, poorer clients. Separate clients but your markets by geographical distance. So you separate the market into low price regions versus high price regions. CDs, for example, often cost much cheaper in the US than they are in the European Union. Also, you can separate the market into segments through looking at the types of consumers, industrial consumers versus domestic users, and charge them different prices. These are all different ways to separate your total market into market segments. Now remember, it's very important not to confuse price discrimination with sales promotion. Make sure you really do understand the difference between both, because sometimes what might appear to be price discrimination is actually just the business trying to promote its sales, like buy one, get one free, or giving a discount to certain members and so on. So don't confuse price discrimination with sales promotion. So let's have a look at third degree price discrimination, because this is the one where you need to kind of know a diagram for. So assume, for example, that in terms of the total or the whole market, this is a cinema setting its prices. So this cinema wants to maximize its profits, and therefore it will charge a price where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So let's assume that marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue at $4, and this would allow the cinema to sell 230 tickets. So marginal revenue and marginal cost intersect at $4 here, and this allows the cinema to sell 230 tickets. Now, because adults have more inelastic demand and students have more elastic demand, you would have a relatively steep demand curve and therefore a relatively steep marginal revenue curve for adults, and a relatively flat demand curve for students, student tickets, and therefore a relatively flatter marginal revenue curve. So at $4 at both, there would be about 130 adult tickets sold, and if you go up to the demand curve, you can charge them $7.50. And at $4, if you intersect the marginal revenue curve for students, you would sell 100 tickets, and you go up to the demand curve and you see that the price is $6. So here, the firm would maximize its profits because it is selling the number of tickets where marginal revenue and marginal costs intersect. However, it would charge the adults $7.50 per ticket and the students $6, and that's depending on the price elasticity of demand. Adults have less elastic or more inelastic demand because they are less sensitive to changes in price when compared to students. Now you'll notice the marginal revenue curve here is a little bit kinked, and that's because it is a combination of both demand curves, the inelastic part from the adults at higher prices, and then it becomes more elastic at lower prices. So it's kind of a kinked marginal revenue curve. So what are some of the advantages of price discrimination for the firm practicing it? First of all, it would allow the firm to gain higher revenue, and it does this by eroding consumer surplus. It allows the firm to produce more and therefore gain from economies of scale, and therefore lower its unit costs. It also allows the firm to drive competitors out of the more elastic market by using the profits gained in the more inelastic market segment to lower prices in the more elastic market segment and therefore undercut its competitors. These are some of the advantages of price discrimination to the firm practicing it. What about the consumer? Are there any advantages of price discrimination to the consumer? Yes, believe it or not, even though the word price discrimination sounds very negative, there are actually advantages to the consumer. First of all, it allows consumers to be able to afford goods and services that they might not necessarily be able to afford. Because what happens is the wealthier, higher income consumers, in a way, sort of subsidize the poorer, lower income consumers. And that's the case with doctors and lawyers who might charge their wealthier clients higher rates for their services than the poorer clients, which might be given pro bono or free services. It also allows consumers to purchase products at a lower price than if the producer had not been able to secure higher prices from others. So a lot of universities will charge international and foreign students higher tuition fees so that they can offer lower tuition fees for domestic students. So this is another advantage for domestic students, maybe not so for international or foreign students. It also usually increases total output for the market as a whole. Price discrimination will do that. Therefore, the product becomes more available to more consumers, and because of economies of scale, allowing the firms to produce a higher quantity of output, it lowers unit costs and therefore results in lower prices. So these are some of the advantages of price discrimination to the consumer, to the consumers. What about the disadvantages? Obviously, there are disadvantages to the consumer. First of all, any consumer surplus that may have existed is eroded. That's one major disadvantage. A second disadvantage, some consumers will pay more than the price that they would have paid if there was no price discrimination. So they will pay more than price would have been if there was no price discrimination. These are some of the disadvantages of price discrimination to the consumer.